Today we're adding and subtracting fractions. Our instructions are add or subtract. We're going to write each answer in simplest form. For example 1, if we had 2/3 minus 1/3. Remember, in order to add or subtract fractions, they must first of all have the same denominator. Well, these two fractions have the same denominator of 3, so I'm going to keep that denominator and then subtract my numerators. 2 minus 1 gives me 1, and 1/3 is in simplest form. Well, Miss J, how can I tell if it's in simplest form? If the numerator and the denominator have a GCF of 1, then it is in simplified form. Example 2, if I have 1/12 plus 1/12, again, these two fractions have the same denominator of 12, so I keep that denominator. Adding my numerators, 1 plus 1 gives me 2. Well, 2 and 12 have a GCF of 2, so I'm going to reduce by dividing my numerator by 2, divide my denominator by 2. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1, and 12 divided by 2 gives me 6. So my simplified answer is 1/6. Example 3. If I had 1/6 plus 1/3. Again, in order to add or subtract fractions, they have to have the same denominator. Well, 6 and 3 are not alike, so I need to find the LCD for 3 and 6. Well, look at the largest denominator and see if the 3, if the smaller one will go into the larger one, and it will. So that means my least common denominator in this case is 6. So I'm going to keep my 1/6, and now I need to get a new denominator here. So you ask yourself, and I won't do this on all problems, 3 times what would give me 6? It would be a 2. So that means I'm going to take my denominator, multiply it by 2, take my numerator, multiply it by 2. So I end up with 1/6 plus 1 times 2 gives me 2, 3 times 2 gives me 6. Now they have the same denominator of 6. Add my numerators, 1 plus 2 gives me 3. 3 and 6 have a GCF of 3, so I'm going to reduce by dividing my numerator by 3, divide my denominator by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 gives me 2. So I get an answer of 1/2. Example 4. If I had 9/10 minus 3/4. Again, these are unlike denominators, so I need to find the LCD. All right, so one thing I could do is I could count by 10 until I can get to a number that is divisible by 4. So if I count by 10, I get 10, I get 20. Well, 4 times a number will give me 20, so that means that my least common denominator is 20. So I'm going to rewrite these with a denominator of 20. In other words, I'm trying to find an equivalent fraction. So ask yourself, 10 times what gives me 20? It will be 2. So take that 2, multiply times this numerator. 2 times 9 gives me 18. 4 times what number gives me 20? It will be 5. So 5 times 3 gives me 15. Now that they have the same denominator of 20, subtract 18 minus 15 gives us 3, so we get an answer of 3/20. Example 5. If I had 5/6 plus 3/4. Well, I need to find the least common denominator for 6 and 4. And if I count by 6, start counting by the largest number, I'll have a 6. I have a 12. As soon as you see a number that this number will go into an equal number of times, then you stop. So 4 will go into 12, so that means that my least common denominator is 12. So I'm going to write 2 equivalent fractions with a denominator of 12. 6 times what gives me 12? 2. So 2 times 5 gives me 10. 4 times what gives me 12? 3. So 3 times 3 gives me 9. Some of you may need to do this. You know you want a 12, so 12 times 2, whatever you multiply the denominator by, multiply the numerator, so that's how I got the 10 over 12 here. I need to know 4 times what would give me 12 would be a 3. Make sure I multiply the numerator by the same number. That is how I got the 9. My denominator is 12. Adding my numerators, I get 10 plus 9, and 10 plus 9 gives me 19. 12 will go into 19 one time with a remainder of 7, so you get 1 and 7/12. Now, how did I do that? I divided 12 into 19. It goes 1. 1 times 12 gives me 12. Subtract 9 minus 2 gives me 7. Take the remainder, put it over the divisor. Example 6. If I had 3/4 minus 11/12, the least common denominator for 4 and 12 is 12. So I'm going to rewrite this with denominators of 12. Ask yourself, 4 times what gives me 12? 3. So 3 times 3 is 9. Well, this fraction already had a denominator of 12, so that means the numerator remains the same. As I do 9 minus 11, I get a -2. And as I simplify, 2 and 12 have a GCF of 2. So my answer is a negative. Take 2 divided by 2, I get 1. Take 12 divided by 2, I get 6. Example 7. If I had 3/5 plus 1/10 minus 3/4. Now I'm looking for the least common denominator for these 3 denominators, okay? So I'm going to look at this larger one and start counting by 10. If I count by 10, I get 10, I get 20. Will 5 go into 20? Yes, it will. Will 4 go into 20? Yes, it will. So my least common denominator for this problem is 20. So I need to rewrite each fraction with a denominator of 20. So I'm trying to get some equivalent fractions with a denominator of 20. 5 times what gives me 24? So 4 times 3 gives me 12. 10 times what gives me 22? So 2 times 1 gives me 2. 4 times what gives me 25? So 5 times 3 gives me 15. As I add these two fractions, 12 plus 2 is 14, so I get 14/20 minus my 15/20. And remember your rules for your negative and positive numbers. 14 minus 15 is a -1, so my answer is a -1/20. Example 8. If I had 3/10 plus 5/8 plus 1/5, you need the least common denominator. Again, I'm going to start counting by 10. I see 10. I see 20. I don't see a number yet that 8 and 5 will go into. I see 30. I see 40. Well, 8 times 5 will give me 40. 5 times 8 gives me 40. So that means my least common denominator is 40. So I'm going to get new fractions with a denominator of 40. And if I get a new denominator, I must get new numerators. Ask yourself, 10 times what gives you 40? It would be 4, so 4 times 3 gives you 12. 8 times what gives you 45? So 5 times 5 gives you 25. And 5 times what gives you 48? So 8 times 1 gives you 8. As I add these first two fractions, 12 plus 25 gives us 37. So we get 37/40 plus 8/40. And when you add 37 and 8, you get 45. So I get 45/40. And 40 goes into 45, 1, with a remainder of 5. And the 5/40 reduces, so I get 1 and 1/8 as an answer. And the last example, example 9. And as I look at problem number 9, I see a -2/9 minus 1/12 minus 7/18. So let's count by 18. I always start with that largest denominator. I get an 18. Well, 9 will go into 18, but 12 won't. Then I get a 36. Well, 9 times a number gives me 36. 12 times a number gives me 36. So my least common denominator is 36. So I'm going to rewrite these fractions with a denominator of 36. 9 times what gives me 36? 4. So 4 times 2 gives me 8. 12 times what gives me 36? 3. So 3 times 1 gives me 3. Then this denominator is already the LCD, so that numerator remains the same. All of these are negative, so when I add a negative 8 and a negative 3, I get a negative 11. So I get a negative 11 over 36 minus 7. And this, let me go back, and I just made a mistake on this, so let me back up. I apologize. Let me go back here. The least common denominator here was 36. I apologize. 18 goes into 36 too, so 2 times 7 is 14. Now, a negative 8 minus 3 is a negative 11. And a negative 11 minus 14 gives you a negative 25. And that cannot be reduced.